Hays County Jail, not too far from here, wondering if I would die there for something I didn't do. Not metaphorically, not dramatically, but literally, wondering if I would die there. I was 23 years old at the time, accused of a capital murder. Sitting in a cell in this same county, trying to understand how my life has shifted from potential to prosecution. Today I'm standing in a university classroom, and my book is preserved in the historic archives of this same county. This talk is called Beyond the Courtroom, because courtrooms don't tell the whole story. They tell a legal story, they tell you charges, they tell you procedures, they tell you who the state says you are, but they rarely tell the human story. I know that because I lived inside the gap between those two worlds. I also know that I'm not the only one. In this same county and others around the state of Texas, other young people, just like y'all, have stood in courtrooms while the public formed opinions before full stories were told. Names like Bobby J. Harper, right here in San Marcos, Christopher Nienhuis in Midlothian, Texas, in the DFW area. Different circumstances, different legal paths, but the same weight of accusations. The same experience of being defined publicly before being understood fully. I used to walk this campus as a student. I sat in the same classrooms just like this. I had plans, I had directions, or at least I thought I did. I didn't finish, I dropped out. Not because I lacked intelligence, not because I lacked ambition, but because life, pressure, identity, and systems collided in ways that I didn't understand yet. Years later, I'll be sitting in a jail cell in this same county, accused of a capital murder. I'm from Houston, by the way, I'm not from here. From a student to a defendant. And now during Black History Month, I'm back at Texas State. Not as a student, not as a defendant, but as someone whose story is archived in this same county. For generations, Black people in places like this were documented in arrest logs, jail rosters, court transcripts. Today, my voice is preserved on my own terms. This is not just personal anymore, it's historical. So when we talk about Black History Month in Hays County, when we talk about incarceration, when we talk about storytelling, we're not talking about something distant. We're talking about something that's ongoing right now, still today. And the question I want you to sit with is this: what exists beyond the courtroom? Because beyond the courtroom is where identities are shaped. Beyond the courtroom is where narratives are formed. Beyond the courtroom is where communities decide what justice really means. That's what I want to explore with you today. Before we go further, I want to widen the lens beyond my own story, because this isn't just about Xyrus. When Bobby Harper's case unfolded here in Hays County, his name moved quickly through headlines, conversations, and community debates. And when Christopher Nienhuis stood in court in Midlothian County, hours away, under a different set of circumstances, his name became public narrative before the full legal process had run its course. Different counties, different facts, different legal paths, but something familiar. The speed of judgment, the weight of accusations, the way a name becomes a symbol before it remains a person. When you study African American history, you study patterns, not just incidents. And one of the patterns that repeats itself over time is this: the presumption of guilt forming faster than the patience for truth. Media narratives shaping public perception before courtrooms finish their work. Communities deciding who someone is before legal reality is fully established. And I want to ask you something honestly. How many cases have you formed an opinion about before hearing all the facts? Let that sit, because we all do it. I've done it too. We scroll, we read headlines, we absorb commentary, we internalize narratives, and once a narrative hardens, it's very difficult to undo. This isn't about relitigating anyone's case. It's about recognizing that the experience of accusation, especially for young Black men, carries a psychological and social toll regardless of the outcome. And historically, that burden has not been distributed evenly. Because Black history in America, and in counties like this one here, has always involved questions of presumption. Who gets the benefit of the doubt? Who gets the weight of suspicions? Who is seen as complicated? And who is reduced to a charge? That's the space beyond the courtroom. And that's the space we're stepping into today. People have talked about the school to prison pipeline, but sometimes it's not a pipeline, sometimes it's a cliff. Hays County has a long history of racial control and criminalization. Not always loud, not always violent in obvious ways, but structured. In San Marcos, Black children once attended the segregated Dunbar school, not by choice, but because segregation dictated where they could go, where they could learn. Education was separate, resources were unequal, and opportunity was restricted. All the same, the Calaboose jail confined black residents in this town. That same building stands today, now the Calaboose African Americans History Museum. Think about that. A jail that once confined black bodies is now a museum preserving black history. History doesn't disappear, it transforms. After Reconstruction, counties across Texas, including Hays County, used criminal law as a way to maintain racial hierarchy. Vagrancy laws, selective enforcement, policing patterns that didn't affect everyone equally. The criminal legal system has long functioned not just as a response to crime, but as a mechanism of social control. Now, I'm not saying the past and the present are identical, but African American studies teaches us to look at the patterns. And one pattern that continues to show up across decades is this: who gets presumed innocent and who doesn't. Black history in this country is not just about segregation, signs, or separate schools. It's about presumption and it's about narrative. It's about who given the benefit of the doubt. St. Marcus is often described as a college town, but it's also a county seat. It's also a courthouse town. It's also a place where legal power is exercised daily. In majority white counties across the country, data consistently shows disparities in who is stopped, who is charged, who sits in pretrial detention. And even when cases don't end in conviction, the punishment of accusation can last years. The jail has always been part of black history here. From the Calaboose to the modern detention center. The buildings changed, the language changed, but the system only adapted. The question still remains: who does this county believe and who does it cage? When I was held in Hays County Jail for nearly 5 years pre-trial, my experience did not begin in a vacuum. It existed inside a longer story about criminalization, narrative, and power. That doesn't mean the past is identical to the present. It means the present makes more sense when you understand the past. And that's why storytelling matters. Because courtrooms document charges and archives document memory. But communities decide meanings. I was 23 years old at the time, not much older than a lot of you here, and I was accused of capital murder. Overnight, my identity shifted from a former student to a headline, from a young black man navigating adulthood to a defendant facing a life sentence. I sat in Hays County Jail nearly 5 years. 5 years pre-trial with no conviction. There's something we don't talk about enough in this country. In America, you can serve years of punishment before ever being found guilty of anything. That's what pretrial detention does. It punishes through delay. It isolates through uncertainty. It pressures through time. It's modernized now. We often think incarceration begins at sentencing, but for many people, especially black men, it begins at accusation. The courtroom tells one version of that story: evidence, procedure, charges, technicalities. But beyond the courtroom, there's another story: trauma, isolation, media narrative forming before facts are tested, family members trying to survive emotionally and financially, psychological endurance. In court, I was charged. In my book, I'm a human being again. And that distinction matters. Because if we only study verdicts, we miss the lived impact of the process itself. My experience wasn't just personal trauma. It was a case study in pretrial punishment. It was a demonstration of how incarceration can function before conviction. It was a living example of systemic imbalance, particularly when court-appointed representatives does not move with the urgency your life requires. And yet, my words are now archived in this same county. That shit is not accidental, it's intentional. I wrote "I killed a man" because I refused to let the only permanent record of my existence in Hays County be a charge. I wrote it because storytelling does what courtrooms cannot. Courtrooms determine legality. Stories restore humanity. Archives have traditionally preserved power, land records, political records, institutional narratives. But when a formerly incarcerated black man's memoir is preserved in the same county that tried to viciously take his life, the archive becomes resistance. It becomes evidence that narrative can move from confinement to preservation. And what makes this even more layered is this: I once sat in these classrooms just like y'all. I was a student just like y'all. I passed that jail every day on my way to class. I lived at the I think it's the Heights now. It used to be University Heights. Right there by the jail, I passed the jail every day on my way to class. I never thought I would end up in that building. And I spent 5 years in my 20s trapped And this is where the conversation gets bigger than me. Because when you study African American history, you have to study the patterns. If you were on a jury here in Hays County tomorrow, would you understand the history behind the case? African American studies isn't about memorizing names. It's about recognizing patterns while they're happening. I'm not just someone who survived Hays County. I'm a part of its history now. And so are every one of you, just because you're students here at this university. What kind of history will you help to write?